This week on the Hollywood in Toto podcast, we explore how hard it is for some Hollywood actors to denounce terrorism. We talk with the key players behind a revival of We the Living, the Ayn Rand film that almost got erased from history. And we learn that George Orwell may be getting canceled by the left. You just can't make this stuff up.
Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. Entertainment news and reviews without the woke Hollywood narrative. Free speech, free expression. Now that's entertainment. And here's your host, award-winning film critic, Christian Toto.
Before we start, I'd love it if you subscribe to the Hollywood in Toto podcast. We've got new episodes every Wednesday, plus more and more bonus episodes coming your way. Check them out. As a younger man, I didn't pay much attention to politics until one morning I drove past the Pentagon on my way to work, and an hour later, a plane crashed into it. September 11th changed me in a really profound way, and I didn't know anyone who died in those attacks. But I did see how the two political parties reacted to the savagery on that awful, awful day. And I chose a side. Here's a hint. It's not the side that cried, "Why do they hate us?" The great comedian Dennis Miller had a similar epiphany about 9/11. And like him, I've been leaning to the right ever since. That's why this podcast offers the right take on entertainment. Not an accident. That means when terrorists commit terrorism, which is obviously on brand, it's not hard for me to call them out without suggesting one side might have deserved it. That isn't always the case in Hollywood. The stars have been struggling to pick sides in the current Israeli-Hamas battle. There really is just one side. It's terrorism bad. Do we need a sticky note for that? Now, listen, we can obviously argue about the best way to reach a two-state solution, the arguments about occupation and all these different nuances to the ongoing situation. I get that. I'm not dumb. But can't we all agree that capturing and torturing people and then putting it on a GoPro camera, that's wrong? It doesn't seem like a tough thing. Well, ask your average actor. It's a point that the great comedian Ryan Long makes in his newest video sketch. Here he's playing just your typical Hollywood actor struggling to pick a social media side this time around.
It's been a few days now. I still haven't weighed in on Israel-Palestine. I honestly don't know who to post. Usually it's easy. BLM, bang. Ukraine, bang. COVID, bang. Hey, did you do your Israel-Palestine post yet? I've never missed a stand. So who'd you go with? I look at my phone, I see a lot of Republicans supporting Israel. So I go, maybe stay away from that. Then I see a lot of the people we've been calling Nazis supporting Palestine. But then get this, the people that we've been calling them Nazis with are happy Israel's getting attacked. Riddle me that. But there really is no easy answer here. Did you do your...
That's great stuff, man. Makes a lot of good points, too. You got to watch the whole thing. Of course, after you listen to our podcast. Now, celebrities often use social media to promote causes they care about. I have no problem with that. It's the American way. But they often use social media to promote causes they think will get them noticed or even hired. The great actor-director Nick Searcy taught me that. Now, we did have some moral clarity in La La Land in the last few days. A group of celebrities, including Jerry Seinfeld, Amy Schumer, Michael Douglas, they signed an open letter condemning Hamas in no uncertain terms. Thank goodness for that. Here's part of their message, just to show how powerful, how pointed, how direct it was. This is terrorism. This is evil. There is no justification or rationalization for Hamas's actions. These are barbaric acts of terrorism that must be called out by everyone. They are a terrorist organization whose leaders call for the murder of Jews everywhere. Oh, moral clarity. It's so soothing to the soul, and often so uncommon, sadly. Again, how hard is it to say that? Seems pretty easy on the surface. Meanwhile, a few celebrities are taking a different approach. Wallace Shawn, who I think people know best for saying, "Inconceivable," in The Princess Bride, sounds like a Hamas apologist these days with some of his recent comments. And then you have actor Riz Ahmed, who's outraged that Israel is fighting back. He's falsely claiming that its retaliation is indiscriminate bombing and that the country is committing war crimes. It's funny, his outrage over the terrorism that started this whole thing in motion, it might have got lost in baggage claim. I don't see it. I don't hear it. Doesn't exist, I don't think. Huh. Weird. Of course, the less said about what Mark Ruffalo and John Cusack have been saying about the Hamas situation, the better. I don't even want to go into it. It makes me just depressed. Very good actors, very troubled souls. Maybe we should turn to Harvey Weinstein, the sage of our age. He was the, obviously, producer who got into some trouble with sexual indiscretions. But before all of that, and before the fact that he's now in jail, thank goodness, he said Hollywood has the best moral compass. I think we can leave it at that. The story behind the 1942 film We the Living might be just as fascinating as the actual film itself. The film brought Ayn Rand's novel of the same name to the screen. It was a sweeping tale of romance and drama, and of course, a quest for freedom. It's kind of a bugaboo of Rand's, and good for her. Except they made the film without her knowledge or approval back in the day. And that was just one of the smaller problems with the film. The filmmakers had to hide the true nature of the story. It was anti-authoritarian, it was anti-fascist, from the Italian officials who were breathing down their neck during the production. If they didn't fake it, if they didn't mislead them, this project would have gotten shut down right away. And then later, after the film was out in the public, those anti-fascist themes got it canceled in World War II era Italy. That's what they did back in the day. And then later, the movie nearly got destroyed. Just another quirk of fate that was able to keep it alive, essentially. Years later, the film's negatives were discovered, and then a crew assembled to bring the movie back to life. And they had Rand's help with part of that process. Pretty fascinating. She obviously warmed up to the material, had some quibbles, but overall, she was on board. But why does a movie still matter today after all these years? My gosh, that was 1942. And I think more importantly, why is cancel culture attacking it in ways that, well, it brings to mind the Italian censorship of yore? Imagine that. Who knew history repeats itself? For more on the story, we turn to Duncan Scott and Robert Begley. Now, Scott is a Hollywood veteran, and he's been working on many films over the years. He also had a hand in Woody Allen's Zelig and also a Midsummer Night's Sex comedy. This guy's got a resume. And he helped bring We the Living back from the cinematic grave, again, along with Rand. Now, he and Robert, who's another passionate defender of Rand's vision and this film, opened up to the Hitcast about the movie, the battle to save it from destruction, and why it's well worth seeing in 2023. Robert, Duncan, thank you so much for joining me. You know, there's so much backstory behind We the Living, so many elements to explore. I think one of the more intriguing parts, though, is how Italy tried to destroy the negatives of the film and how they were later discovered. Could either one of you just jump in and quickly share that story? Because I thought that was so fascinating and such a memorable way, the fact that this is still alive and we can still retell the story.
Yeah, it's a miracle, really, that we still have the film. It could have been lost forever. Actually, that situation happened more than once. But what you're referring to is the movie got released, wildly popular. It was the #1 film in Italy for that year. And then it was banned. Nevertheless, it was still the #1 film for the year. And Mussolini ordered that the negatives and all the other film materials be destroyed. And the reason for all this is it was an embarrassment to his government. The conditions that the audience were seeing in the film was way too close for comfort to what was going on in Italy. And people were talking about it in the streets. The movie actually came to be referred to as the film of nudging in the dark, meaning you're sitting next to somebody and you point up at the screen and say, hey, that's what we're going through. And so Mussolini just couldn't tolerate that anymore. And also the Hitler's regime, the Germans had seen a print of the film and they basically said, what are you doing showing this film? And so he ordered it destroyed. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The filmmakers, instead of sending in the negatives and all the other materials as they were commanded to do for We the Living, they found another film which wasn't as valuable to them, and they sent in the negatives for that film on the hope that the authorities, this is the fascist Ministry of Culture, that they would not actually unspool the whole negative or be able to tell that it wasn't actually We the Living. And their gamble paid off. It was not discovered, and this other obscure film was destroyed, and We the Living survived. And to do that, they had to take the negatives, and they were hidden in the basement of one of the production team for the duration of the war, and only brought out after the war was all over. And then the negatives got lost after that. They didn't have to be destroyed, but the 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 studio that made the movie went out of business after a few years. The Italian film industry was really struggling after the war, and this particular studio went out of business after a while, and they sold off their inventory, and it changed hands a few times, and before you knew it, nobody really knew where We the Living was. And it was only decades later that associates of Ayn Rand, Henry Mark Holzer and Erica Holzer, heard about the film from Ayn Rand and said, where is this film? And she said, I think it's long gone. I haven't heard anything about it in decades. And they asked if they could go search for the movie. And they said to her, if we find it, would you permit it to be re-released? And she said yes, but there were certain conditions. Um, and I can get into all that. So it's kind of interesting and ironic, though, that the film was originally even approved by the fascists. I mean, here's Ayn Rand. She's written so eloquently and passionately against authoritarian and totalitarian and anything like fascism. Her whole career was spent writing against that sort of thing. And yet this movie was made with the approval of the fascist Ministry of Culture. I mean, it was a really very shallow view of the story. It was anti-Russian, and that was good enough for them because they were at war with Russia.
It's
So a lot of ironies to look at in this.
absolutely. And I understand that when they were shooting it, during the production, they would shoot different scenes or mock moments that they could feed to the fascist ministers and say, okay, here's our story. It's not very controversial or not very illuminating to the to the current plight of the country. And then but they were actually shooting another film at the same time. Is that correct as well?
No, there's two different stories
Okay.
mixed into what you just said. These controversial scenes, the filmmakers knew that they were treading on, difficult ground here with some of the scenes they were filming. So the fascist Ministry of Culture would come over frequently to the editing room and ask to see the dailies. And the editors and the producers basically said, don't show them that scene. Show them everything else, but don't show them that scene because they knew it would get them into trouble.
Hmm.
And this, as the story is told by the production manager, I interviewed him in the late 1980s, quite old man, but he had supervised the production of We the Living, um, and he said the the inspectors from the Ministry of Culture would look at what was there and they say, well, isn't there more? I mean, you were shooting all day yesterday. This isn't very much. And they said, no, no. They would shrug and say, no, that's it. And I think there was maybe a little bit of winking going on. They maybe they knew that stuff, I guess, was being hidden from them. I think. I don't really know that. The other thing that you're referring to is they originally set out to make one movie, and only while filming did they realize they had enough material for two movies. Um, and one of the I should explain why they didn't know in advance that they were shooting enough material for two movies. The original script for the movie had been the director came back to get started on the movie, and he looked at the script and he said, "This is hopeless." uh, but everything was in place. The crew was hired, the actors were hired, the sets were built, so they had to get into production. So they quickly started writing another script. The associate producer would sit on the set and write dialogue for the next day's filming or a couple of days down the road. And they went, and of course, shooting that way was hard to gauge how long this movie was going to be. And he would have the novel, Ayn Rand's novel, right in front of him, and basically taking dialogue out of there. So one of the wonderful aspects of that is much of the dialogue is true to the book. Not everything, and I can tell you about some major exceptions, but much of the dialogue was quite true to the book. But they realized they had way more material than could ever fit into one film, and so the studio decided to make two films out of
Mhm.
it, and that's great. But the only problem with that is they decided not to tell the stars of the movie because they know they're gonna want more money.
Right,
So let's
right,
just
right.
not tell them.
Uh-huh.
Of course, what
So
could go wrong, right?
movie making
But
hasn't changed that much over the years, apparently.
right.
Yeah.
80 years later,
Uh-huh.
it's still there.
Yeah.
But
Now,
of course, the actors caught onto it, and there was a protest and walking off the set, and things got fixed, and they got paid more money, and they ended
gotcha.
up making these two films.
Now, Duncan, now, from
And
what I
it
understand, if I may interrupt real quickly, you worked with Ayn Rand with the renovation, with the sort of the putting this film back together. Two quick questions about that. One is, what was that process like working with her? And also, I understand that she pulled back at some point, and I don't know if she ever shared with anyone why she did that. Can you expand on that?
sure, sure. If you don't mind, I can go. It's a kind of unusual how I got involved and ended up working with Ayn Rand, but I read that the movie had been rediscovered, and I didn't know Ayn Rand or any of her associates. I really didn't, wasn't connected with anybody. I was just interested in her books and fascinated and caught up in all that. And I read this little notice that the movie had been rediscovered and they were going to re-edit it. And I was an assistant film editor at the time, uh, not really at the pay grade that should be working on restoring a film classic, but I wrote
22
a
years
letter
old, right?
to. Yeah, yeah, really wet behind the ears. I decided out of character for me at that age that I was going to write them a letter and say, "Hey, I can do this movie." And I did it, and then I sent the letter off, and then I thought, what was I thinking? I have no connections. I don't know these people. I probably won't even get a response. But somewhat later, I did get a response, and they were deciding to not use a person that they originally were going to use as an editor. And I met with them, and one thing led to the other. And before you knew it, we were arranging for Ayn Rand to see the movie um, in its original form. Of course, we hadn't done any work on it, and so that event was really remarkable in itself. Um, Ayn Rand and the collective, which is her kind of her humorous name for the people, her closest associates,
Mhm.
all came over to the studio where I was working. The studio had graciously let me use their facilities. And this group of people, it's about a dozen people, huddled around chairs in front of a moviola. I mean, the moviola that they used to use in that day with a kind of like a 5-inch diagonal screen. And you can imagine a dozen people trying to see the movie that way.
Right.
But it gets worse or better depending on your point of view. The movie was had to be loaded one reel at a time onto the moviola, and then of course when the reel was done, that taken off, another reel put on, and the original running time of these two films was 4 hours. So you can imagine taking these reels off, putting them back on, running them that way. It was a very long evening, but everybody was just enthralled with the film. It was just incredible, and it wasn't translated yet. So somebody had to read the English translation as the movie was running and do the best they could to kind of synchronize with what was going on in the film. It was a very remarkable evening.
And what was her reaction, or just maybe from that point on? Obviously, she wasn't involved with it, and then she had a legal fight to get some compensation, but it was so faithful to her vision. Obviously, she embraced it and supported it. Talk a little bit about how her connection with the film and how she helped make it a reality in the newer form.
Yeah, it's a story. There's just so many bizarre angles to this story. Um, she not only did not approve the making of the film during World War II, she wasn't even aware that they were making the film. Of course, Italy and the U.S. were at war. The mechanism for getting rights to a film from the U.S. was pretty much impossible, if not totally impossible. And what the studio should have done is say, well, we'll pick another property.
Hmm.
But they really wanted to do this film. And they went ahead and shot it anyway, unbeknownst to her. She had no idea this film even existed until after the war. Um, and uh, she, you're asking about her legal problems with the film.
No, I mean, just, I kind of just work.
Maybe.
What was her when she's working with you, when she's commenting on the film itself, her feedback, just anything that comes to
Mhm.
mind as far as that relationship you had creatively with her. I mean, she's such an iconic figure,
Yeah,
and you had this unbelievable once in a lifetime moment to discuss it with her. Explore her vision. Things like that. Just anything that
right.
jumps to mind.
Yes, absolutely. I would describe it for Ayn Rand, it was a love-hate attitude towards the film. Most of the film, especially the performances of the three main actors, she loved. And it is amazing. Anybody that sees the film, it's Alita Valli is an icon of the Italian cinema, and she's never been better in any other film than she was in this. It was a very demanding role, a very powerful role emotionally, and she just is incredible in it. And Ayn Rand appreciated that. She thought the actor who played Andre, who was supposedly the villain or the antagonist anyway, early on in the film, but becomes an extremely sympathetic uh, character as the movie progresses. And she loved his performance, even though he wasn't what she pictured for Andre.
Hmm.
You have to remember that We the Living, the book, was based on Ayn Rand's own experiences growing up in Russia, and she drew heavily on actual people and actual experiences. I mean, it still is a novel, but she drew very heavily on things that happen. And some of the characters in the movie had the same names as people she knew
Hmm.
in real life in Russia. So she looked at the film with a that sort of eye, and she just appreciated the acting of Fosco Giacchetti so much that it didn't matter that she had pictured somebody 20 years younger portraying that role. Um, and Rossano Brazzi, who this film kind of made his career as a serious actor. He was up to that time kind of in swashbuckling movies and things like that. This was a really heavy duty role for him, and he was amazing. And it was a tough role because his character arc goes the other direction. He's a sympathetic character, and one you root for in the beginning, and then you really start to question him and see somebody disintegrating in front of
Hmm.
your eyes. And that was a remarkable performance for him as well.
Yeah, yeah.
She, yeah, she thought he was quite pretty, and but here's the hate part of it. She loved all that, but the fascist Ministry of Culture had made the filmmakers insert some propaganda dialogue in a few places, very, very small percentage of the film, but it was very offensive to Ayn Rand. It was so contrary to the values that were so important to her, to what she spent her life writing about and writing against totalitarianism, and this dialogue just contradicted that and corrupted the story.
Yeah.
So it was a condition that release the film, we had to remove those lines of dialogue,
And that
and
makes sense.
that's another.
Obviously, that's consistent with her vision, consistent with the story, and obviously it was jammed
Yeah,
in there for terrible reasons. There's a million reasons to discuss this movie. It's an arc. It's part of film history. It's part of Ayn Rand's lore. We can go on for days, but it also, to me, reminds me of where we are as a culture today about efforts to suppress art, efforts to suppress speech. Can either of you just discuss briefly why it's important that this is seen today, not just as a wonderful film that has stood the test of time, but there's something else here. I think that we're taught that we're maybe not talking about directly, but it feels part of the conversation.
yeah, Robert, I'll let you jump in on this, but Christian, I just want to say there's two aspects of that. There's the cancel culture that we've been facing unbelievably on this film, but also it's amazing. We're discovering to our amazement how incredibly relevant the film is after 80 years and how current it is. And we're seeing that just real recently in recent screenings.
Hmm.
But Robert, do you want to jump in about what we've been hitting up against as we try to release the film?
Yes, thank you. Well, Christian, this is right out of your book, which is called Virtue Bombs: How Hollywood Got Woke and Lost Its Soul. And we're dealing with a movie industry that has pretty much lost its soul. And what Duncan and I have gone through in trying to promote this film, his 80th anniversary restoration, um, almost everyone's afraid. We have to go to alternate PR, alternate marketing and advertising, and because Duncan will get so far with an actual film company, and then all of a sudden they'll just not reply to emails, and because very likely somebody realizes, oh, this is that Ayn Rand lady, she's a fascist. We can't have that, you know. But I'll give you one good barometer, which was the Film Forum in New York City. They said yes, thanks to one of Duncan's assistants,
Gibson Merrick. Yeah.
Yes, Gibson Merrick secured Film Forum. It took a long time. I will eternally be grateful to them, but it was like pulling teeth to get information from them. They would have movies on their website that were showing before and after We the Living. Their Facebook ad did not even mention Ayn Rand. It just mentioned the director. I got to New York. I went to New York a couple of times before the screening, and there was just nothing mentioning the movie. Not on the marquee the day of the screening. And even Duncan was told, he was given 5 minutes to speak before the screening, and they said, you can mention Ayn Rand, but you can't mention her politics. So this is what we were dealing with. Now, for me, as a one of 9 kids who grew up in a film family, my father was not Ed Begley Jr., but a different Begley, working in television. And I always stay to the last. I never leave the movie theater until the lights come on. I always stay and watch all the end credits. And to be in this theater that was sold out, Christian, you could smell the popcorn. Everyone is rapt attention. And then the end credits come up, and I get to see my name on the screen, Duncan's name. And Rossano Brazzi's nephew is sitting behind us, and that like justified everything. So I'm forever, whatever criticism of Film Forum, I'm forever grateful to them for that.
Right.
But these are some of the things that we're facing in trying to promote the film in today's day and age.
That's fascinating.
Well,
I want to dig.
Really,
okay, Duncan, go ahead.
I was just going to one little footnote to that. What's really frustrating, Robert touched on it, is that we would get somebody from a distribution company or a publicity company or exhibitors, and the person would see the film and say, "This is wonderful! Oh my God, what a find! This is right up our alley." And then they would go back, and you just know what happened next. They talk to their colleagues, and as Robert pointed out, somebody who was spoon-fed the notion that, oh, Ayn Rand's a fascist, we can't be associated with her. I can just imagine the dialogue. Oh, but it's a great film. Oh, but we can't do that. And this happened again and again and again. And it's cancel culture at its worst in the entertainment industry. And we're doing almost everything ourselves now, because the film's getting out there, and obviously not waiting for those people to join forces with us.
You mentioned the Ayn Rand connection. I think that explains a lot. Do you think that maybe other things about the film, the themes, the satirical notions, or not satirical in a comedic way, but sort of the way it's exploding and exploring cultures and political systems, that maybe, do you think that makes it radioactive as well?
Honestly, I don't. And Robbie, you can jump in too, but I think when it's pretty universal, the themes in this movie, even, across the spectrum, people are sympathetic to these characters who are trying to live their life. All they want to do is the right to live their life, pursue their dreams, not be squashed down and suffocated. And I think there's a pretty broad appeal. I mean, there may be some people way out there that don't aren't sympathetic with that. But I think the vast majority of people are. And I really think the resistance we're getting is not about the content of the movie. It's easily Ayn Rand's least political novel. Yes, they're in a terrible political system, the characters, but she doesn't. It's not like Atlas Shrugged. It's not like The Fountainhead, where she delves into her philosophy so deeply. This was her first novel, and she didn't do that in this novel. It's a beautifully written novel, and people should see the movie and read the novel because it's some of her most poetic writing, in my opinion.
Now,
But I do not think it's the content that was the problem with these people.
gotcha.
If I could just add
Sure.
one thing to that, Christian, when Duncan, as he just said, it's not political, but people have this view of Ayn Rand. But when he screened the film in Miami several years ago, not this restored version, I think it was a cab driver who went in and he
Yes.
said, "I don't like Ayn Rand." And he's like, "But this movie is beautiful." He was moved, and that's kind of what we think. That's why this should be seen by everybody for that precise thing.
Yeah.
We're not trying to convert people. It's beautiful art, beautifully done with a universal message.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah,
And I think
he
it looks like a
actually-
modern film in some ways with the lush cinematography and the acting and I think that great films have a timeless quality that is just lovely to behold. But we only have a few more minutes, but I do want to ask briefly about how the actual negatives, were they in terrible shape when they were found? Has it taken a kind of a Herculean effort to get them to look as good as they do today? I've seen the film, so I was kind of curious, how damaged was it, and how painstaking was that process?
It's not an easy question to answer. It was damaged, and there were problems with it, but it was good enough that we released the original version, the unrestored version, in the around 1990. It was played in about 70 theaters around the U.S. We later released DVD, and you could see the missing frames and jiggling here and there and scratches and dirt. But we still had this like safety fine grain that was made from the original nitrate negatives, and so we had really incredibly high quality source. And as digital technology developed, we realized we can fix these problems. We weren't even thinking about that in 1990. A lot of the digital technology hadn't come along yet. But a few years ago, we realized, wow, we can get rid of the dirt, we can get rid of the scratches, we can improve the sound, even replace missing frames. It was an arduous process, but it wonderful also because you just saw the film get restored to where it was, and I like to think it's pretty close to the way it looked when it opened in theaters in 1942.
That's a remarkable job, and it's amazing to see older films being spared and saved and restored and brought back for a new generation, because that's part of why this is so important. Robert and Duncan, thank you so much for joining the show. I could talk about this, the backstories, all the details forever, but if you want to find more information, go to WeTheLivingMovie.com. You'll also find out details about the screening, which is coming up November 9th in Charlotte, and there will be a Blu-ray and streaming release of the film, possibly as early next year. I know that information is still in flux, but people will be able to see it that way at some point in the near future, I guess you could say. But any other ways that people can check it out?
Yes. When they go to WeTheLivingMovie.com, be sure to look for the newsletter button to sign up, because that announces where the movie is going to be shown,
Excellent.
when the streaming is going to be released, when DVDs are going to be released. So they really want to sign up for that newsletter. Well,
thank you both for sharing some time, sharing these stories, and for saving art and art that is important and that speaks to modern times. I wish it didn't, but it does, and that's just all the more amazing. Thank you both, and I'm sure people will be checking out the movie as soon as possible.
Thank you so much, Christian.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it.
Attention Time magazine editors, let's just make George Orwell the man of the year every year until this woke mind virus goes away. I think that'd be best. Of course, Orwell's 1984 is playing out in real time across the culture. It's amazing. It's remarkable. And of course, it's remarkably scary. which is why a recent biography of Orwell's wife caught my attention. Now, the book itself is a few months old now, but it's getting some press accolades for some of the things it's saying. I want to read a snippet from The Guardian's summation of the book. He desperately wants to be decent, and wanting to be decent is an honorable thing, a noble thing. But writing a book like 1984, which is violent, misogynist, sadistic, grim, paranoid, that comes out of a writer's flaws, says the biographer in her book. I hope the biographer doesn't tackle Stephen King next. She's going to have her hands full. This is where we are today. This revisionism, this going back in time, finding these literary heroes and then attacking them and savaging them and suggesting, well, we can't pay attention to what they say. They were bad people, or they were people of the era who maybe had some of the values of their times that don't reflect how we think today. You know, there is cultural progress. That's a good thing. But you can't go back in a time machine and then wag your finger at people who didn't believe exactly what we believe today. It's absurd. Oh, and by the way, last year, the staff at the University of Northampton, they put out a trigger warning on 1984. They said it had explicit material, which some may find offensive and upsetting. That's according to the Daily Mail. I mean, to be fair, a totalitarian state is upsetting and offensive. Good thing that's not happening today, right? Oh, man. Guys and gals, 1984 was a warning, not a manual for modern times. Again, how hard is this? Well, that's it for the show this week. I know we've had a lot of gloom and doom, but maybe next time we'll have some better news to report. But thank you to Radio America for having me as part of their great podcast lineup. And while I have your ear, I hope you'll drop by HollywoodInToto.com. It is updated 7 days a week. It's got news, reviews, and commentary on everything that's happening in Hollywood. It is, again, the right take on entertainment, and it's been woke-free since 2014. See you next time.